I hate her! The words tore out of Ysolde, like something physical, like a wound finally allowed to bleed after weeks of being bound too tight. She lunged half a step forward, blade still raised, close enough now that Briar could see the wild tremor running the length of her arm, could smell the road dust and cold sweat still clinging to her travel cloak. "I hate you," Ysolde said again, louder, directly at Briar this time, spit and fury behind every word. "Do you understand what you've cost me? Do you have any idea what it is to watch the life you built for a year dissolve because a border healer decided her grief mattered more than everyone else's future?" "Ysolde," Roswin started, moving toward her, but she rounded on him before he could close the distance, blade swinging wide enough that two counselors near the dais scrambled back out of its arc. "Don't," she snapped. "Don't you dare use that voice on me. Not after you stood in front of this entire council and chose her over everything I have ever done for this pack." "Stop!" Roswin's voice cracked through the chamber like a physical blow, louder than Briar had ever heard him raise it, loud enough that even the guards flinched and hesitated a half second before surging forward. "Put it down," he said again, quieter now, but no less lethal. "Or I promise you, Ysolde, whatever mercy I might have shown you a moment ago ends the instant that blade moves another inch." For one endless moment, nobody in the council chamber moved. Ysolde stood with her blade hand raised, breath coming hard. Roswin hadn't moved either, coiled toward the space between the two women, close enough to intervene, too far to stop a blade already in motion. "Put it down," he said again, quieter now but no less lethal. Ysolde's eyes flicked to him, searching for some sign he might still be reachable. She didn't find it. Her hand began to shake. Not fear, Briar realized, but the shaking of a woman finally hearing everything she'd refused to hear for weeks. The blade dipped, then dipped further, then fell, clattering against stone, with a sound too small for everything it represented. Two guards moved in on either side of her, careful, not rough. She didn't fight them. She didn't say anything at all. She only looked, once, at Briar, not with hatred anymore, something closer to exhaustion, and let herself be led away. The chamber emptied slowly after that, counselors filing out in murmuring clusters, all of them carrying the disorientation of people who had watched their pack's leadership crack open in a single evening. Corwin stayed behind long enough to confirm what Briar already suspected. Thane was gone clean, out through the stables, riders already dispatched to find his trail before it went cold. "He had a horse staged," Corwin said, low, to Roswin, once the chamber had cleared. "Eastern stable, not the nearest one to the kennel yard, the one that gave him the most ground before anyone thought to look east. That's not panic, Alpha. That's a man who's had an escape planned for longer than tonight." Roswin's jaw tightened. "Then find him before he reaches ground he's prepared for." "Riders are already moving." Briar stood a little apart from them, feeling strangely weightless in the aftermath. No bond pain pulling at her chest, no danger left to brace against. Her hands were shaking too, though not from anger. 3 years of certainty had just come apart, and her body hadn't caught up to the rest of her. "You should rest," Roswin said, turning to her, and for once it didn't sound like an order. "So should you. I don't think either of us will." He wasn't wrong. Neither of them slept much that night, and by morning the pack house had the strange, brittle calm of a place that had survived something without yet understanding what it had survived. Guards who had once watched Briar like she might dissolve into smoke now simply nodded to her as she passed. Corwin found her in the kitchens near midday, a cup of something bitter and dark cradled in both hands. "For what it's worth," he said, without preamble. "I never trusted you. I want you to know I do now. You don't owe me that." "No," Corwin agreed. "But I'd rather say it than let it go unsaid." He set the cup down. "Ysolde's judgment is this afternoon." He asked me to make sure you knew, in case you wanted to be there. Why would he want me there? Corwin studied her for a moment, something almost like amusement flickering behind his exhaustion. I think you already know the answer to that, he said, and left her alone with it. Before we continue, drop your city below, Moonbound lovers. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. I'll be in the comments. Subscribe, hit that bell, and let's fall into this one together. Ysolde's judgment came the next morning, in a smaller chamber than the one where everything had unravelled. No full council this time, only Roswin, Corwin, a pair of guards, and Ysolde herself, still in yesterday's travel-worn gown, her elaborate braids finally unpinned and hanging loose and plain around her face. She looked younger like this. Briar, standing at the edge of the room, because the bond still hadn't fully released its hold on proximity, found she couldn't quite summon the fury she'd expected to feel. You drew a blade on an unarmed woman in my council chamber, Roswin said, not shouting, flat, final, the voice of a man who had already made his decision and was only now speaking it aloud. You threatened to kill her in front of every councillor I answer to, knowing fully well, if you hurt her, you hurt me. I have spent 3 years learning what it costs a pack when its leadership cannot govern its own house. I will not spend the rest of my rule discovering what it costs when its Luna cannot govern herself. So that's it. One mistake, made out of love, and a year disappears. Ysolde's chin lifted, some of the old highborn composure trying to reassert itself even now. It wasn't one mistake, Roswin said. You weren't even thinking about me. It was selfish. I can forgive fear, Ysolde. I can forgive grief. I cannot build a pack's future beside someone who reaches for a blade the moment she feels unchosen. So you're choosing her, Ysolde said, and her voice cracked on the word, her, glancing once toward Briar, with something that still had teeth in it, even now. A border healer, with no title, no house, no claim to anything, over everything I could have brought this pack. I'm not choosing her, Roswin said, quiet enough that the whole small room seemed to lean in to hear it. I'm choosing peace. I spent 3 years carrying a war that wasn't even mine to carry, and I have watched what happens to people who let anger decide who they become. I won't build a life with someone who's already shown me she'd rather burn everything down than lose it. That isn't a choice between 2 women, Ysolde. That's a choice between 2 futures, and I already know which one I want to survive to see. For a long moment, Ysolde said nothing at all. Something in her face folded inward, not into rage this time, but into something closer to grief for a version of herself she'd apparently only just recognized. Where will I go? She said finally, quieter than Briar had ever heard her. Home, to your father's holdings, with an honest account of what happened and why, Roswin said. Not banished as a criminal, released, as a woman this pack could not, in good conscience, crown. What you build after that is yours to decide. Ysolde nodded once, sharp, final, and let the guards lead her out without another word. She didn't look back at Briar again. Briar found, watching her go, that she didn't need her to. Ysolde's father arrived 3 days later, already shouting before he'd fully dismounted, his daughter riding hard beside him rather than behind him. The courtyard dissolved into chaos. Where is he? Halvard bellowed. Where is the alpha who thinks he can humiliate my daughter in front of his entire council? Roswin stepped out to meet them. Briar, coming from the healer's stores at the noise, arrived just in time to see Ysolde's face. Pale, tear-streaked, arranged into something like fear. Boo-hoo, father. She meant to do to me what she did to him, Ysolde said, pointing at Briar. I heard her whispering the same words she used to curse the alpha. She wanted to bind me too, control me, the way she's controlling him. I only drew my blade to protect myself. That isn't what happened, Briar said. I never! Halvard crossed the courtyard in 3 strides and struck her across the face before Roswin could close the distance. She went down hard onto the stone, ears ringing. The courtyard erupted. Guards surged forward on instinct, blades half-drawn, Corwin shouting for them to hold. Enough! Roswin's voice tore through the courtyard, and every wolf froze. You do not strike anyone within my walls, he said, standing over Briar now, coiled and lethal. Not a servant, not a guest, not a woman kneeling on my own stone. You never had that right. She humiliated my daughter. I have every right. You have no rights here at all, Roswin said. But since you've come for truth, here it is. I do not love your daughter. I never did. I understand now why I never could. Some part of me always knew what she was capable of, even before she proved it to an entire council with a blade in her hand. Ysolde's face went white, whatever composure she'd built her lie around collapsing entirely. Roswin didn't look at her again. He crossed to Briar and knelt, one hand under her elbow, gentle in stark contrast to the fury still burning through everything else about him. Can you stand? He asked, quiet, only for her. Briar let him help her up, too stunned to answer, not by the pain, but by the plain fact of him choosing her, publicly, in front of the alliance he was destroying to do it. Get off my land, Roswin said, turning back to Halvard. Both of you. Set foot on Duskmere ground again, and you'll be treated as trespassers, title or no title. You will regret this, Halvard said, backing toward his horse. 3 generations of alliance, thrown away for a border healer. Then start counting the years it takes you to find another alpha, foolish enough to build peace with a house that strikes kneeling women in someone else's courtyard, Roswin said. I doubt you'll find many. Halvard mounted without another word, hauling his daughter up behind him. Ysolde looked back once, not at her father, not at Roswin, but at Briar, something on her face that might have been shame, if she'd had the courage to name it. Then they were gone, dust swallowing the road behind them. Roswin walked Briar to Ivy's stores himself, one hand steady at her back the whole way. I can walk on my own, Briar said, though she made no move to step away. I know. It's the least I owe you, he said, at the doorway, studying the bruise already blooming along her cheekbone. For what my brother did to your family. For 3 years, none of us thought to look closely enough to stop it. You didn't have to sever an entire alliance for me. I didn't do it for the alliance's sake, Roswin said. I watched a man strike you to the ground, and every part of me wanted blood for it. I'm done pretending an alpha's duty means swallowing that kind of fury for politics I never wanted. The air between them went still, his hand still warm at her back, his eyes fixed on hers. There you are, Ivy said briskly, appearing in the doorway with a jar of salve, entirely unbothered by whatever she'd just interrupted. Sit, child. Let me look at that before it swells. Roswin stepped back, the tension easing from his shoulders, though his eyes lingered a moment longer before he finally turned to go. Rest, he said. That's an order this time, and I intend for you to follow it. He left her in Ivy's hands, and Briar found herself watching the empty doorway long after he'd gone, still feeling the warmth of where his hand had rested against her back. The pack gathered 2 mornings later in the courtyard, the full breadth of Duskmere, assembled the way Briar had only seen once before, the night everything had unravelled in the council chamber. This was different, not chaos, but ceremony, Roswin standing before his people to speak plainly about what had happened, because a pack held together by half-truths and rumour was a pack one bad season away from tearing itself apart. He told them everything, the curse that wasn't a curse, his brother's guilt, carried silently for 3 years, while an innocent border healer bore the blame for a crime that was never hers to answer for. Ysolde's fall from grace, delivered without cruelty, but without softening either. Briar stood at the edge of the gathered crowd, feeling every eye eventually find her the way they had that first terrible morning in the council chamber. Except this time, the calculation in those looks had shifted into something else entirely. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it, maybe. The kind of grudging respect a pack offers someone who turned out to be telling the truth all along. Not everyone in the crowd received it kindly. A knot of younger wolves near the western wall muttered among themselves through most of the speech, and one of them, a broad-shouldered man Briar recognized vaguely from the kennel yard, finally raised his voice loud enough to carry. "He was one of ours," the man called out. "Grew up in this pack house, same as the rest of us. You're asking us to just accept he's gone. No trial before the full council. No chance to speak for himself in front of everyone he wronged." "He spoke," Roswin said, meeting the man's challenge without flinching from it. "In the same chamber where his crime was uncovered, in front of witnesses enough to satisfy any council this pack has ever convened. I will not stage a second spectacle for a man who has already confessed to everything he did. That isn't justice, Talvin. That's theatre, and I won't ask this pack to sit through it twice." Talvin held his gaze a moment longer, jaw tight, and then, slowly, dropped it. It wasn't agreement. Briar could see that plainly enough. But it was the kind of grudging acceptance a pack needed, more than easy consensus. An alpha willing to be questioned, and willing to hold his ground when the question didn't change the answer. 3 years ago, Roswin said, his voice carrying clean across the courtyard, Duskmere failed a border village that trusted our banner to mean safety. I stand before you today to say plainly what I should have said the moment I suspected it. That failure was not accidental, and it was not mine alone to answer for, though I will carry the weight of not seeing it sooner for the rest of my life. I owe every family who lost someone that night an apology. This pack has been too slow to offer. I intend to spend whatever years I have left as your alpha, making certain it is offered in full." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was the silence of a pack absorbing something too large to respond to all at once, and Briar watched it settle over the courtyard like weather changing. Not resolved, not healed, but honest, in a way Duskmere hadn't been in a very long time. An older woman near the front, grey-haired and weathered, stepped forward from the crowd before anyone else moved. Briar recognized her, distantly, from the War Council, one of the border stewards, the kind of woman who'd buried more than her share of grief over the years. "My sister's boy was in that village," the woman said, her voice steady, despite the visible effort it cost her. "I have spent 3 years hating the wrong banner. I would like to know her name, the healer who found the truth none of the rest of us thought to look for." Roswin turned, and something passed between him and Briar in that moment that needed no bond at all to carry it. "Briar," he said. "Her name is Briar." The steward held her gaze for a long moment, then bowed her head, not deeply, not with the full formality owed to a Luna, but with something that felt, to Briar, far more valuable. Acknowledgement, simple and unadorned. It was the first time since her mother's garden burned that anyone outside Ivy's cottage had said her name like it mattered. One by one, others in the crowd began to do the same, not a formal gesture, nothing choreographed, just a ripple of small nods and murmured acknowledgements moving through the gathered pack like the last of a storm passing overhead. Briar felt each one land somewhere she hadn't realized was still raw. 3 years of being disbelieved, slowly, imperfectly, beginning to heal in front of the very people who'd once looked at her like a madwoman from the border. Ivy arrived 2 days after that, summoned by a rider Roswin had sent the morning after the council, and Briar felt something in her chest tighten with an old, familiar dread the moment she saw the old healer's face in the doorway of the solar, because Ivy had never once, in all the weeks since the curse, looked quite this certain about anything. "It's done," Ivy said, before either of them could ask. "Whatever it was reaching for, I felt it the moment I crossed into the pack house gates, like walking into a room after a long storm has finally passed. "What's done?" Roswin said. Ivy set her satchel down and took each of their hands in turn, the same ritual she'd performed twice before, except this time her eyes didn't stay closed for long. They opened almost immediately, and there were tears standing in them that hadn't been there in the cottage, hadn't been there in the solar, hadn't been there at any point in this long, unraveling month. "I told you from the first night," she said. "This was never a curse. It was a binding, and binding magic doesn't punish. It reaches for the truest thing between two people and holds them to it until that truth is spoken, seen, and accepted by both of you. It wasn't hate holding you together, Briar. It was never hate. It was the truth neither of you had found yet, that the man you blamed was innocent, that the guilt he carried belonged to someone else, that grief had aimed both of you at the wrong target for 3 long years. And now that the truth is out," Briar said slowly, understanding arriving in her chest a half-second before the words did, "the binding has nothing left to hold. Its purpose is fulfilled," Ivy said. "The mark will fade. The pain, the pull, all of it, gone, because it was never meant to last forever. It was only ever meant to last until you both saw clearly. And you have." Briar looked down at her palm, at the pale gold crescent that had marked her for weeks, and watched, genuinely watched, though it happened slowly enough that she almost doubted her own eyes. The colour began to thin, the edges softening like ink diffusing in water, fading rather than vanishing, as though the working were simply exhaling one last time before it let go. Across from her, Roswin examined his own palm with the same quiet astonishment. "I don't feel it anymore," he said. "The pull, the ache when you're not near." He looked up at her, something unguarded in his face that she hadn't seen even in their most honest moments. "I don't feel anything holding us together at all." "No," Ivy agreed gently, gathering her satchel, already moving toward the door as though she understood this was a conversation that belonged to the two of them now, and not to her. She paused in the doorway, though, and looked back once, her weathered face softer than Briar had ever seen it. "For what it's worth, child, I've read every account of blood bindings your grandmother ever recorded, and I've never once found one that reached this deep, or held this long, over something that wasn't real. Whatever grows between you now, it started from truer ground than most people ever get to build on." "You knew," Briar said. "From the first night. You said it wasn't hate." "I suspected," Ivy corrected, gentle but firm. "I've lived a long time, and I've learned that suspicion and certainty rarely arrive together. I didn't want to hand you a hope that might have been wrong. Better to let the truth find you both in its own time, than to plant something in you that the binding might not have been able to grow into anyway." "Thank you," Briar said, and found the words weren't nearly enough for everything the old healer had carried for her these past weeks. The warnings, the visits, the patience with a girl who'd once learned forbidden magic from a dead woman's journal against every piece of advice she'd been given. "Don't thank me yet," Ivy said, something wry breaking through the emotion in her voice. "You've a whole life left to build now, without a curse to excuse any of the hard parts. That's harder than surviving one, in my experience." She left them alone in the solar, the fire crackling low, the fading crescent marks the only evidence that any of this had happened at all. "You're free," Roswin said, quiet, testing the words. "You can leave whenever you want. Duskmere has no hold on you anymore." Briar didn't answer right away. She was still looking at her palm, at the mark growing paler by the hour, feeling something she hadn't expected to feel at the exact moment she got everything she'd once thought she wanted. She felt like staying. She didn't say that yet. There was still a brother to catch. The days of waiting for word of Thane found Briar in the healer's stores more often than anywhere else, and it was there, elbow deep in dried yarrow and crushed feverfew, that Corwin found her on the second afternoon, leaning in the doorway with an expression she couldn't quite place. "You don't have to keep working," he said. "Nobody would think less of you for resting." I don't know how to rest, Briar admitted, not looking up from the herbs she was sorting. I've spent 3 years with a purpose so sharp it cut everything else away. Now that it's gone, I don't quite know what to do with my hands. Corwin leaned against the wooden counter, arms crossed. I wanted to say something, and I didn't quite know how to start. He paused. This pack owes you a debt. None of us are equipped to repay properly. I've served Roswin since we were both boys, learning to hold a sword too heavy for either of us. I have never once, in all that time, seen him the way he's been since you cursed him. Furious? Exhausted? In near constant physical pain? Alive, Corwin said, simply. He carried Thane's guilt like a stone around his neck for 3 years, and none of us knew to help him set it down, because none of us knew it wasn't his to carry. You gave him that. Briar didn't have an answer for that right away, something thick rising in her throat that had nothing to do with the herbs in front of her. Thank you, she managed finally. Don't thank me, Corwin said, echoing, without knowing it, words Ivy would say to her only days later. Just don't leave too soon. He left her alone with that, and Briar found herself smiling down at the herbs in her hands for the first time in longer than she could remember. Those 4 days had been their own kind of strange interlude, Duskmere holding its breath, waiting for confirmation of a fate none of them had fully processed yet. Briar spent them in the healer's stores she'd finally been given proper access to, restocking dwindling supplies, teaching 2 of the younger packwomen what she knew of the herbs that grew along the border, grateful for work that let her hands stay busy while the rest of her waited. Roswin spent them buried in the business of a pack that didn't stop needing its alpha, simply because its alpha's world had cracked open. Border reports, grain counts for the coming winter, a dozen small crises that would have felt unbearable in any other week, and now felt, strangely, like mercy, something to do besides wait. She found him twice during those 4 days, once in the war room past midnight, staring at a map he clearly wasn't seeing, and once in the walled garden at dawn, standing exactly where she'd left him the evening the vision had first cracked his understanding of his brother wide open. Neither time did they speak of what was coming. There didn't seem to be words yet for a grief that hadn't finished happening. When the rider finally came, dust-covered and grim, words spread through the packhouse within the hour. Found, taken, returning, and Briar watched something in Roswin's shoulders both loosen and tighten at once, the particular relief of an ending finally arriving, paired with the dread of what that ending would actually require of him. The riders found him on the 4th day, 30 miles short of the Ashvale border, in a rocky hollow where a narrow stream cut down through pine and granite, the kind of ground a man chose when he needed water and cover both, and needed them fast. Corwin led the party himself, 6 riders spread wide across the tree line to close off every direction Thane might bolt, and later, recounting it to Roswin, he admitted it had been closer than any of them wanted to say aloud. Thane heard them coming. He was already in the saddle by the time the first rider broke the tree line, already turning his horse hard toward the narrow gap between 2 boulders that was the only ground soft enough to outrun them on. "Hold the gap!" Corwin had shouted, and 2 riders had cut across at a dead gallop, close enough that Thane's horse reared, rather than run the risk of the collision, and for one long, breathless second, the entire hunt balanced on whether a frightened animal would bolt forward into the gap, or shy back into the hollow. It shied back. Thane didn't try to fight his way clear after that. He simply sat very still in the saddle, both hands visible, gold hair plastered to his forehead, with 5 days of hard riding and no proper rest, and when the riders closed the circle around him completely, he looked, Corwin said, almost relieved to finally stop running. "I wasn't going to make it anyway," he'd said, quiet, as they bound his wrists. "I think some part of me knew that the moment I crossed the second river, I just didn't know how to stop." They brought him back in chains, and Briar watched from the edge of the courtyard as he was led through the gates he'd fled through less than a week earlier. Gold hair matted with days of hard riding, the easy charm that had carried him through 3 years of lies finally, entirely gone from his face. He didn't look up as they marched him past the gathered pack, didn't seek out familiar faces the way she might have expected from a man who'd spent his whole life needing to be loved. He simply walked, eyes down, like a man already serving a sentence he'd passed on himself long before Roswin ever got the chance to. Roswin met him alone, in the same small chamber where Ysolde had received her judgment, though he asked Briar to stand at the back of the room this time, not for the bond, which no longer demanded her presence, but because, he told her quietly beforehand, he didn't think he could do this without knowing she was there. The chains rattled faintly as Thane was brought forward and positioned in the centre of the room, and for a long moment the brothers simply looked at each other. 3 years of shared history, of a childhood spent in the same corridors, hunting the same woods, standing on opposite sides of a gulf neither of them had known was there until it swallowed them both whole. "You could have simply left," Roswin said, once the guards had positioned Thane in the centre of the room, chained and dishevelled and refusing to meet his brother's eyes. "Years ago, before any of this, you could have asked me for anything you wanted, and I would have found a way to give it to you." "I didn't want anything given to me," Thane said, and there was no more warmth in his voice at all now, none of the golden ease that had fooled a pack for 3 years. "I wanted it earned. I wanted them to look at me the way they looked at you, without you standing in the doorway first. So you burned a village to make me a monster." "I burned a village," Thane said, and something in his voice cracked, finally, under the weight of saying it plainly for the first time, "because I panicked, and then I kept burning things, quietly, carefully, for 3 years, because it was easier to let you carry the guilt than to admit what I'd actually done. I told myself it was fair. You had everything. I thought you could afford to carry one more thing for me." "She lost her family," Roswin said, low, and Briar felt the old grief rise in her chest at hearing it named so plainly. Her mother, her 6-year-old brother. "You let the entire border believe I was capable of that, and you let her carry 3 years of hatred for a crime that was never mine." Something in Thane finally broke at that, some last thread of composure giving way all at once. He surged forward half a step, chains snapping taut, guards moving to restrain him before he'd gone more than a foot. Not an attack, Briar realized, watching it happen, but something closer to collapse. A man's legs nearly giving out under the full weight of 3 years finally landing at once. "Boo-hoo. Do you think I don't know that?" His voice cracked entirely now, raw and unguarded in a way she had never once heard from him, not even in his most careful moments of manufactured warmth. "Do you think I don't know that? Haven't heard that fire in my sleep. I have hated myself so completely, for so long, that hating me now will feel almost like relief compared to carrying it alone." "I know what I did." Thane's voice broke entirely on the last word. Quieter now, the fight gone out of him as suddenly as it had risen. "I have known what I did every single day since it happened. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am only telling you, I never stopped loving you, even while I was destroying everything you had. That's the part I can't make anyone understand. Both things were true." Roswin was silent for a long moment, and Briar watched him absorb it, watched the alpha and the brother wage some private, wordless war behind his eyes, before he finally spoke again. "You will be stripped of your name and your place in this pack," he said, and his voice didn't shake, though Briar could see what it cost him to hold it steady. "You will be exiled from Duskmere lands, forbidden to return under pain of death, and the truth of what you did will be recorded and read before every border village that lost someone that night, so that no one carries a lie about who was responsible ever again." He paused. "I would have given you anything you asked for, Thane. I would still give you almost anything, even now, but I cannot give you my pack's trust, because you already showed me exactly what you do with it. Thane's head dropped. When he spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. For what it's worth, I am glad it was her curse that undid me, and not something crueler. She deserved to see the truth. I only wish I hadn't made her wait 3 years to get it. He said nothing else. The guards led him out through the same gates he'd fled through, this time toward the border and beyond it, toward a life with no name and no home, and Roswin stood in the center of the empty chamber for a long time afterward, saying nothing at all. Briar crossed the room and stood beside him, not touching, not needing the bond to tell her he needed the quiet more than he needed words. "It's done," she said finally. "Yes," Roswin said. "It is." Word of Thane's exile spread through the pack house by evening, and Briar watched it move through the corridors the way grief always moved through a place, in lowered voices, in half-finished sentences, in the particular silence of people who had loved someone and were only now allowed to admit how much that love had cost them. She didn't envy Roswin the days ahead. A pack didn't heal from a wound like this quickly, and he would be the one standing at its center while it did, holding the shape of Duskmere together, with nothing but the same steady control that had cost him so much these last weeks. She found him near sunset, in the same study where all of this had first taken shape, the study where he'd paced and called the binding intolerable, where he'd knelt in front of her chair and asked if she still believed he'd killed her family. He was standing at the window this time, looking out over the walls, toward the border his brother had disappeared, beyond, and he didn't turn when she entered. "I keep expecting to feel triumphant," he said, quiet, more to the window than to her. "Justice was done. The truth is out. My pack is safe from the one danger it never saw coming, and all I feel is tired." "Grief doesn't care whether the outcome was fair," Briar said, coming to stand beside him. "It only cares what you lost getting there. You're allowed to mourn a brother even after you've exiled him." "Is that what you did?" he asked. "Mourned, even while you hated?" "Every day for 3 years," she admitted. "I don't think grief and hatred were ever as separate as I wanted them to be. I think I needed the hatred, some days, just to have something to hold on to, instead of the emptiness underneath it." Roswin turned to look at her then, something searching in his expression. "And now that the hatred has nowhere left to go?" "Now," Briar said slowly, feeling her way toward an honesty she hadn't quite let herself reach for yet, "I think I finally have to find out what's underneath it instead." Neither of them said anything else for a long moment, the last of the day's light draining slowly out of the sky beyond the window, and when Roswin finally spoke again, his voice had softened into something that had nothing to do with alphas or councils or the weight of a pack's survival. "Walk with me," he said, "not because anything's pulling us together anymore, just because I'd like the company." Briar found, without much surprise at all, that she wanted exactly the same thing. They found their way to the walled garden that evening, the same one where so much of this had already happened. Her confession about the vision, his grief over Thane's guilt, all of it. And for the first time in weeks there was nothing forcing them into each other's orbit. No pain, no pull, just 2 people who had chosen, without quite deciding to walk the same path toward the same stone bench. The garden looked different to her now than it had that first afternoon when she'd still been half a stranger, wearing someone else's grief like armor. The ivy along the walls had gone deep green with early summer, small white flowers threading through it she didn't remember noticing before. "I need to say something," Roswin said, once they'd settled into the quiet, the last gold light of evening slanting low across the ivy-covered walls, "and I don't want the bond's absence to make it feel smaller than it is." "Go on." "Thank you," he said, "for saving me from an enemy I didn't even know I had. I spent 3 years assuming the danger to this pack was on the northern border, in Ashvale's ambitions, in every threat I could see coming. I never once thought to look inside my own house. If you hadn't cursed me, if you hadn't been furious enough and brave enough to walk into my bedchamber with a blade you fully intended to use, I don't know how long Thane would have kept wearing my trust as a weapon. Briar felt something in her chest loosen, an old tightness she hadn't realized she was still carrying. "I'm sorry," she said, "for trying to kill you. I know it doesn't undo anything, but I need you to hear me say it plainly, the way you just said your piece plainly. I was so certain. I built 3 years of my life around a hatred that turned out to be aimed at the wrong man entirely, and I never once stopped to ask if I might be wrong, because being wrong felt like losing the only thing I had left." "I understand that better than you might think," Roswin said, "and I owe you an apology of my own. Not for the raid. I know now I didn't light that fire, but for every year before you cursed me that I let border villages like yours suffer under the assumption that Duskmere's colours meant safety, when I never once rode out to check whether that was true. I was so focused on the war I could see, I let my own brother walk unquestioned through the damage of the one I couldn't. You didn't know. I should have wondered," Roswin said. "Grief deserves better than assumptions, Briar. Yours most of all." They sat with that for a moment, the evening settling gold and quiet around them, and Briar found herself turning the last piece over in her mind, the one thing she hadn't said yet. "I'm sorry about Ysolde," she said finally. "Not for what she did. She made her own choices, and I won't apologize for surviving them. But I ruined a year of your life, an alliance you'd built carefully, an engagement that made sense on paper in every way this doesn't. I never meant to cost you that." Roswin was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, there was something almost like wonder in his voice. "You didn't cost me anything," he said. "You opened my eyes. I chose Ysolde because she made sense, because an alpha is supposed to choose alliances the way a general chooses ground, carefully, strategically, without letting anything as inconvenient as feeling get in the way. I told myself that was wisdom. It took a curse I never asked for to show me it was only fear, dressed up as duty." He looked at her, steady, unguarded. "You didn't ruin anything, Briar. You're the reason I finally understand what I actually want, instead of what I thought I was supposed to want." Briar's breath caught, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, the space between them charged with something that had nothing to do with old magic, and everything to do with two people finally allowed to feel whatever they wanted to feel, without a curse deciding it for them. "I keep thinking about the first night," she said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. "Kneeling beside your bed with that blade. I've replayed it 100 times since, wondering what would have happened if the binding had done exactly what I asked it to do. If it had simply killed you, the way I meant it to. I'd be dead," Roswin said, "and you'd have spent the rest of your life believing you'd finally gotten justice for a crime I never committed." "I think about that too," she admitted, "that I could have gone my whole life certain I'd done something righteous, when really I'd have murdered an innocent man and let the guilty one walk free forever. The binding didn't just save your life, it saved me from becoming someone I don't think I could have lived with being." "Then perhaps," Roswin said, something almost gentle in his voice, "we both owe that old magic more than either of us has said aloud yet." "What happens now?" Roswin asked, eventually. "For you, now that Duskmere has no hold on you at all." "I don't know," Briar admitted, and found, to her own surprise, that the not knowing didn't frighten her the way it once would have. "I have no village to go back to, no family waiting, just a satchel of herbs and whatever I decide to do with the rest of my life." She glanced at him sideways, something lighter breaking through the heaviness of the last few days. "At least you're not bound to me anymore. You should be relieved. No more collapsing in council because I wandered too far." Roswin laughed, really laughed, low and surprised, the first unguarded sound she'd heard from him in the entire time she'd known him, and it changed his whole face, softened every careful, controlled line of it into something younger, something unburdened. "I should be relieved," he agreed. "I find that I'm not." "No, no," he said, and the laughter faded into something quieter, something that held her gaze without wavering. "I spent 3 weeks resenting a bond I never asked for, and now that it's gone, all I can think is how much I don't want the quiet it left behind." Briar stood, because she didn't quite know what to do with the way her chest had gone tight and warm all at once, and because some old instinct told her that if she stayed sitting this close to him a moment longer, she'd say something she wasn't ready to say yet. "I should let you rest," she said. "You have a pack to rebuild, counselors to reassure, a brother's absence to explain to villages that deserve better than they've gotten." She managed a small, unsteady smile. "Goodbye, Roswin." She turned to go. His hand found hers before she'd taken a second step, fingers closing around her wrist. Not the old bond's tug, nothing pulling her back, except the simple, deliberate weight of his hand, choosing to hold on. "Stay," he said. Briar turned back. In the fading gold light, his face had none of the alpha's careful stillness left in it at all. Only a man asking for something he wanted, plainly, without a curse to hide behind, and without one to blame if she said no. "Just for tonight," he said, softer now. "Or for as long as you'll let me convince you it's worth staying. I'm not asking because anything's forcing either of us anymore. I'm asking because for the first time since you knelt beside my bed with a blade in your hand, I finally know exactly what I want, and it isn't peace without you in it." Briar looked down at their joined hands, at the place where a glowing crescent mark had once lived and now showed only a faint, pale shadow of where it used to be. Proof, she realized, not of a curse that had bound them, but of a truth that no longer needed magic to hold it in place. "I curse the wrong alpha," she said, quiet, something like wonder in her own voice. "And somehow I found exactly the right one." She didn't pull her hand away. He drew her closer, slowly, giving her every chance to step back if this wasn't what she wanted, and when she didn't, his other hand came up to rest against her jaw, gentle, questioning. She leaned into it before he could ask permission with words. 3 years, she murmured, half to herself. "I spent 3 years certain the only thing left for me was revenge. Neither did I plan for this," Roswin admitted. "I spent my whole life certain an alpha chooses with his head and never his heart. You've made an excellent case for foolishness." The garden settled into evening around them, ivy stirring faintly in the breeze, the last gold light giving way to the soft blue hush of dusk, and for the first time in 3 long years, Briar let herself stay somewhere simply because she wanted to, not because grief or magic or vengeance had left her no other choice. Somewhere beyond the garden walls, Duskmere was still learning how to be a pack, without the golden brother it had trusted for so long, still counting the cost of a truth 3 years too late in arriving. There would be difficult seasons ahead, councils to rebuild, alliances to mend, grief to properly bury instead of simply outrun. None of that had disappeared, simply because one curse had finally, quietly, done what it was always meant to do. But for tonight, none of it followed them past the garden gate. For tonight, there was only the fading warmth of a hand that had chosen to hold hers, and a healer who had spent 3 years certain she knew exactly who deserved her hatred, finally, gladly, willing to be wrong. The end. "Back to you, my moonbound lovers." Was Roswin too harsh on his own brother? Could you have forgiven Thane if you were in his place, or was exile the only justice that made sense? And when Thane said he never stopped loving him, even while destroying everything he had, do you believe that was really love, or just another lie he told himself? What about Ysolde? Was she being selfish, Or do you think she was just protecting her alpha? And Briar and Roswin, a healer who once wanted him dead, now the only one he wants beside him. Did you see that coming? Or did this one surprise you? Tell me in the comments. Moonbound lovers, I read every single one. Stick around. A brand new story is dropping soon, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay bound to the moon.